jazz has been an influence on major rock drummers. Mitch Mitchell and John Bonham, even Charlie Watts. You got to remember, Charlie Watts was a jazz drummer before he joined the Stones. And he still is a jazz drummer to this day. He has a big band, he plays jazz. And they're not playing just a steady beat. They're playing all over the place, which is what jazz drummers do. They're not playing a steady beat, so to speak. They're playing an improvised beat, which is complementing what they're hearing. The other musicians, they're reacting. So a lot of these guys, when rock started out, that's what they were doing. They were reacting to what they heard the guitars or the vocals or the bass doing. And that's what jazz did. So they brought that sensibility into the rock music. As rock progressed, though, things changed a bit. And the reason why things changed, I think, is because of the commercialization of rock, right? So you want to reach a broader audience. The general listener can't a lot of times comprehend and doesn't have that capacity to comprehend a lot of things happening. So they dumb it down, right? So that's why it became simpler, right? Not to say that that's bad, but commercialization. You want to reach a broad audience as opposed to a focus, and they don't want it to be a niche thing anymore. Anyway, so essentially, yeah, a kid grows up way back when, listening to jazz records because his parents love jazz or blues records. He wants to play drums. He's learning from those records. So he has those sensibilities. His friends start a band. They start doing this new sound or coming up with this new sound. He joins in. The jazz sensibility is there. The new type of music is there. They join together. And from that point forward, it starts. You know, so that's my perspective on it. From my perspective, yeah, of course, jazz and blues heavily influenced rock. I mean, before rock, what was there? What type of music was there in popular music? It was jazz, it was blues. So it's the natural progression. What happens is people grow up listening to a certain style of music, be it jazz or blues. New music genres start to formulate, and these are the guys who are part of that movement. So they're naturally going to bring in what they grew up listening to and grew up playing and learning into the new movement, right? So yeah, jazz and blues definitely had a direct, influence on rock music. Mm-hmm. So they're taking what they knew and what they learned, and they're trying to make it their own now, and that evolved into rock. I know there's been a lot of talk about drummers such as Mitch Mitchell, right? And he was influenced by Elvin Jones, who was a very famous jazz musician. So he was trying to, a lot of the times, a lot of these guys, they try to emulate their favorite drummer, but they're emulating them in a whole different style of music. So Mitch Mitchell was trying to play like Elvin Jones, but he's playing with Hendrix and he's playing rock, right? So that's how, the one genre migrated to the next genre, and the influences, that's how the influence comes into play there. Definitions of genres of music and style, offshoots of styles of music. Again, it's art, right? So what's classic art? What's a classic car? A classic car is a car that's from 50 years ago. That's why they call it classic. So getting back to the question as far as music is concerned now, I think for me, classic rock or classic R&B, classic blues, anything that you want to term classic is going to be subjective to the individual. Because I grew up in a certain time period, anything that I grew up listening to in my formative years, be it, your late teens, early 20s, and I listen to that now that I'm 50, that music is going to be classic to me, but it's not going to be classic to you. Because right now, you're in the period where you're in your sponge period, I call it. Your teens to your early 20s, I call that your sponge period, where you're just absorbing everything, processing that information, and that stuff is influencing you for down the road. When you get to your 50s, 40s, 50s, and later on, that stuff will be classic to you because that's what inspired you and made you who you are. So classic rock is a term, I think, that the record labels and record stations put on some music. Categorizing it has always been an issue in record stores when they had record stores. Even on iTunes, you can see classic rock classification. The term classic, I think, I don't know. I wouldn't use that. I would just call it rock music. But I understand what they're saying. Led Zeppelin is classic rock because it was from the 70s. So,
you think it's a marketing term, essentially?
Exactly, yeah. Music essentially is what people look to escape their everyday life. When they hear that piece of music, it takes them somewhere. When you're younger, you feel like, I'm expressing myself, I have something valid to say, why don't people appreciate me for who I am? But as you get older, you can only swim upstream so long before you get tired, right? At the end of the day, we all got to pay bills, right? Essentially is what I'm saying. So when you're younger, you can afford to try and make your mark and make a difference and not sell out to the corporate side because you have less responsibilities. But as you get older and your responsibilities mount, sometimes you have to dial it back a bit. It's a business, right? It's a business. It's all up to the individual what you want to do. If you're comfortable with it, go for it. As long as you don't harm anybody, hurt anybody, I don't see any problem with it. You can definitely hear the difference between rock from Europe as opposed to rock from America. It does sound different. At home in Europe, people grew up listening to classical music, studying classical music. At home in America, again, people grew up listening to blues and jazz. So, like we said previously, they grew up listening to that music, studying that music. When they started getting together with their friends and formulating a band and their own music, that's a heavy influence. So you can hear that in the music when they play. That's why this is a whole other topic and discussion that's kind of touchy with musicians, and the subject is feel. When you hear somebody in Europe play drums, their feel is totally different than somebody from America. Not to say one feel is better than the other. They play the exact same thing, but it sounds totally different, and that's feel. And that feel comes about from what you grew up listening to and studying, and your environment, how you grow up. Whether you have a nurturing environment or a cold environment where you don't have personal interaction with people, that has an effect on the way you play and the music that you create. So European music is very different than American music as far as rock. And I can hear it. It's like plain as day. And I think that's changing as we progress in this world, because now the world is a lot smaller because of the internet and technology. We can see things right away from the other side of the world, and everybody can see what everybody is doing. So that's changing. But yeah, in yesteryear, different cultures, different result. They can play the same thing, but it sounds and feels totally different. Not to say one is better than the other, but yeah, American rock and European rock, totally different. And you have Asia too, don't forget Asia, right? So they're doing their thing too. Then you have South America, they're doing their thing. The way South Americans play rock is different than North Americans or Europeans. So all these places around the world, playing the same type of music, but they have a different sound because of the way they grew up in their culture. That has effect on the music.
Hey, thanks for watching. My name is Daniel Sarkisian. I'm an independent filmmaker from Toronto.